I almost
Hello,
missed
Ross.
it.
What's
We
up,
were
Russell?
talking, we were like hanging out, and then all of a sudden 9 o'clock was like, "Yo,
Randall
I'm
was on
here."
point though. He had it.
Yeah, I know. He caught
He
it.
yelled it out.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Happy day after Black Friday.
Ugh.
Uh-huh.
It's I don't know. What do they call this? White
Saturday.
Saturday?
Just Saturday.
Green Saturday.
Just Saturday.
Okay, just Saturday.
Yeah.
Happy
Yeah.
Saturday, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. Did you guys eat any turkey this week?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Favorite,
Yeah.
one of the favorite holidays. I mean,
I do like
turkey,
Thanksgiving.
stuffing, pumpkin pie.
We
Hmm.
had, dude, we get this, got this apple pie that was out of this world. So good. I love
My
apple pie.
favorite is cranberry sauce. So I made like
Cranberry
a
sauce is good.
gallon
Yeah.
of it. Yeah. Pretty
You
Homemade?
good.
make homemade? Homemade's the
Oh
best too
yeah,
when it's like,
homemade. You
yeah,
can't you
yeah.
can't like
Oh,
jar that thing. Can't
that,
get
that
that
thing of jelly that
jelly.
comes out of the
Yeah.
jar.
Oh
Can't get
God.
that dog food looking
That one that still looks like a can.
jelly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't get that. You got to get the
Oh
real
God.
thing.
Oh,
And I go
that's
ham,
funny.
man. You make the cranberries, you cut up like a little orange in there.
Oof.
No, the citrus
Delicious.
Yeah.
does go well in it though. It does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good.
Uh-huh.
And then we did Black Friday shopping yesterday. Went out
Hmm.
in the crowds, went to the mall. That was fun. It's
Yeah.
madness.
I don't like it
Here's
on
an
Black
here's an
Friday.
interesting question.
Yeah.
Should I mean, because I'm sure a lot of people are busy this time of year. There's holidays, there's family, there's events, all types of stuff. And let's say that you're supposed to be learning coding and everything, and then you miss a few days.
Yeah.
Should you get down on yourself because of
Yes.
that?
And give
Yes.
up
Yep.
immediately.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yep.
rage quit.
Yeah.
Yep. That's
Like,
the
I
only way
knew
to
this
do it.
wouldn't work.
I knew this wasn't going to happen.
No,
No.
I think that's one of the hard things when you first start out learning, though, definitely is realizing that like it takes a lot of work and fitting it into your schedule and persevering through times when you can't. Because like there's gonna be stuff that comes up. You know, there's family stuff, there's
Yeah.
and it's managing that, but not letting that stuff also become,
You know,
crushing your dream kind of thing.
yeah. You know what I did this year was in our course, in our web dev incubator coaching program, we do quarterly planning. And part of my plan this year was actually knowing that this was coming and like giving myself space to not go crazy with coding this month because I knew there's just,
Yeah,
you
it's a
know,
lot
a
to
lot of
do.
family stuff and events and gatherings and whatever. I mean,
And
this week,
especially like
this
from
week has been
Thanksgiving to
busy.
Christmas, dude, it's
Yeah.
like that whole
Like,
like to New Year's really. It's just that
yeah.
stretch, and then you get a big break after. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
just
kids
know that
have
it's
off
gonna be
of
slow.
school and everything. So, yeah. Speaking of, I don't know if you guys know this, but we have a Black Friday sale going on. So if you are watching this live right now, or maybe
You can
listening
also
to
call
it
it a
on
Cyber
YouTube,
Monday too. Either way, it's good.
yeah, Black Friday, Cyber Monday. By the
Or just
way, if you
regular
are
Saturday.
watching us on YouTube, come hang out on Facebook. We have an amazing community over there of like-minded developers who are trying to break their way into this industry just like you. So come over to facebook.com/groups/code noobs and come hang out. It's a totally free group. You can post, a little bit about your journey and learn from other people and get some great insights. And if you are on Facebook, I mean, if you're on Facebook, yeah, and you haven't already, go check out our YouTube channel because we have extra content over there as well that you may not always see over here. But either one of
And
you,
also comment down below. Let us know what you're up to this Thanksgiving,
yeah, let
Cyber
us know.
Monday type holiday.
Yeah. But what I was saying is we do have a Black Friday sale going on for our web dev Kickstarter, which is our sort of introduction to web development course, takes you through HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, as well as building a cool little Pokemon Chrome extension. And that course is the most off that it will be all year. It's 75% off. So you can get it for only $25. You just use the code TURKEY at
Nice.
checkout. Yeah. Turkey,
Whoa,
like
Cool.
how'd you
as in
come
the
up with
turkey
that
that
one?
you. I mean, I was thinking
As
like
as in the turkey that you would be if you didn't scoop up that deal. Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
nice.
Very nice. Pun
There's a little
intended.
stretch of logic on that one, but that worked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so with that, today's episode is all about breaking free from tutorial hell. Have you guys ever been in tutorial hell? Have you ever felt
Oh
that
yeah.
feeling? What
You
does
know
that
what?
Oh
feeling
yeah.
feel like for you?
Here, I was actually just gonna say what it felt like for me. That's funny that you
Oh,
asked that.
well, I was reading
Now,
your mind, Danny.
I remember it really clearly though. I remember like I remember being in our boot camp and like I was doing, because I had access to LinkedIn Learning and stuff and like
Mm-hmm.
YouTube, obviously. So I was doing tutorials on the side. And like every time I did one, there's that good feeling of like, okay, because you're getting a reward from doing it, obviously. And you're obviously typing it out, you're learning something, right?
Yeah.
But I remember at one point I just stopped and I was like, I don't know how to do this myself though.
Yeah.
Like, so like I don't know how to start, to plan it, to do it, and then I don't know what to do after because none of the tutorials ever launch anything. It's always you
Yeah.
build it, but you never deploy it. And that's where really like I felt this like I don't know, it just felt like this is pointless to keep doing this if I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how. And that's when I started just and it sucked at first, but just trying to work on my own stuff. And that was probably the best transition ever because it just helps you actually, you know,
Yeah.
become a
Danny.
developer.
You made a good point because in a lot of the coding tutorials, the people who in a lot of them, all of them, they've coded it out before. And so they're just basically copying their code. And so what you end up seeing in these coding tutorials most of the time is not how you would actually code a project. Like they're just
Yeah.
literally writing it line for line. So like they're putting in all the CSS and everything before they've even put the element on the screen to know what
Yeah.
it looks like normally. And it just doesn't make sense because you're like, how could you know that that's supposed to go there? Like these guys must be wizards. I could never do
Yeah.
that.
That's how I used to feel too, right? You feel stupid because it's like it seems like they can just code out a whole project like with no mistakes, no issues, and you're not seeing any of the real process. And like you said too, I think that's the worst thing too. It's out of order. It's not how a regular developer would
Yeah.
approach it. And I think that's a huge problem because then you end up not knowing how to do this yourself. Because if you're new and you try to like start connecting everything right away, you're gonna have it's gonna be so many bugs and so many issues because you don't know what you're doing. But they
Mhm.
do, and it's like, and also you don't really necessarily do projects like that. Depends on the project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that I've taken from doing a lot of the hacking stuff is kind of when I go through something that I didn't understand the first time, doing it again. And I think that can also be applied to coding tutorials. So like let's
Oh
say
yeah.
you go through a coding tutorial and it just seems like something completely out of like you don't understand it at all. If you try going through it again, maybe on your own to see if you could do it, because I do that with a lot of these boxes when I have no idea what's going on. And so I'm like learning the first time through it, and then I go through it again, see if I can actually get through it on my own without referencing the notes to see if I could actually learn something from doing it.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
I the other thing I was doing too is I would take a tutorial that I did and then I'd make a new project modeled on it. So something different, but
Mm-hmm.
I'd follow along either with the tutorial or with the code as a guide and try to create something myself. And that was a good practice of like starting to put things together on my own and work through the design and stuff. I also think a really good thing too is adding something onto it, like whether it's like, you built the tutorial project and then you figure out how to deploy it, or you add a new feature to it that's totally unique and different and you struggle through that process. But something where you're doing it all on your own is really critical too, I think, in that
Yeah.
process.
I
Plus,
think
it
you
gives you a
guys,
unique thing to add to your portfolio as opposed to just
yeah.
the
Yeah.
same tutorial that everyone else has done. Yours is unique.
Yeah. I think you guys both make a good point. Good morning, Bryce. So I wanted to bring up something that happened actually this week inside of our web dev incubator program, which is one of our students, Charles, was like going through some Next.js tutorials. And I think he sort of felt a bit of like tutorial hell, right? Where he was like, I just did this JavaScript mastery tutorial. I spent like a long time doing it, and yet I don't feel like I actually gained anything from it. And so some of the advice I gave him was, and this is what I found myself doing a lot in the beginning too, was almost just following tutorials blindly, like hoping
Yeah.
that somehow by like, I don't know, like symbiosis or something, I'm going to learn stuff just by like writing it, which is
That does work.
helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I found was really helpful when I was learning was to actually break up these tutorials, because like a lot of times like a JavaScript mastery tutorial is 5 to 8 hours long, and if you just code that from beginning to end and then try to go back through all of that code, it's really tough to see like the progress of what happened. So what I found that really helped for me was doing maybe like a half hour of coding, maybe an hour, and then go back and look at that piece of code and see if I can go line for line and explain what's going on in here. Because a lot of times, like what you had said, the coding tutorials are done already. So the complexity of like working through logic has already been done.
Yeah.
And so you're just coding it like at the speed of light a lot of times with tutorials too, because they don't want to make them 20-hour long tutorials, right? But the reality is it takes a long time to code out a big project. So it is helpful sometimes to just break that up and go back every half hour. And what like you really have to focus, especially in the beginning. If you don't understand something, your goal is to figure out what is going on there. So if you're reading it and you're like, I don't know what this is, don't just pass over it. You need to actually like go and look up some MDN docs or whatever package you're using, those docs, and see, okay, what's actually happening here? Because that's where the learning happens.
You actually remind me of something too. Hold on. I want to go because I already thought of this before and I don't want to
Hey
forget.
guys, don't
No,
fight, don't
this
fight.
is something I thought of actually a while ago. I didn't want to forget for today, and I'm glad I remembered. I think one of the things you can get from just writing out this code and doing like what you said is a really good idea. I used to do that too. Even using
Yeah,
like AI if you need to help explain it.
yeah.
But learning to see the connections, like why are things being done?
Mm-hmm.
What is the response? What's the request? Why do these things connect this way? Because when you start to see that higher picture, the
Yes,
syntax you can always look up. There is
yes,
always going to be a place you can look up what's the right syntax in the right language for this thing. There's documentation, there's all kinds of resources. If you understand how things connect together, you can figure out how to do it.
yeah.
And learning that, like how those things talk and connect, is like crucial. So I think that is a really good one. Sorry, go ahead, Randall.
Well, that touches on what I was going to mention too, is that not being too focused on the wrong goals. So like a lot of times, especially when I was in
Mm.
On
tutorial,
getting it
hell,
done.
I thought
Yeah.
that getting done the tutorial was the important part. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'd like gloss over going through documentation or going on
Yeah,
some tangent that was necessary for this so I could learn something. And I missed out on a whole bunch of stuff because I thought the faster I finished the tutorial, the faster I'd get to that end goal that would be the job and the money and all of that stuff. But really,
Also, it
yeah,
it's like,
feels good, right? I mean, it makes sense because you're like, okay, I did this I can put now I say I did this, even though like, really did you? It's like,
yeah,
yeah,
but the tutorial is just part of the learning process, and the learning process requires you to go through these different avenues to actually learn the stuff. Like you're not, even though you can learn a little bit from just following along, by actually taking the time to go through the documentation to learn the stuff as you're doing it, because that's another thing where like we oftentimes think that we can just like put it off till later. Like these things that are new topics for us as we're going through something, we're like, oh, I'll just put it off till later. I'll put it off till later. And it's like,
yeah.
but it's appropriate right now. So maybe you should just do it right now while it's appropriate, because later is never going to get done.
you know what it
Yeah.
reminds me of too, and I think the analogy works really well. It's like if you're in school or something and you get assigned a reading assignment and you have your textbook and you're reading and you don't look up any words you don't understand, you just skip over, you just
Yeah.
skip over concepts you don't understand. At the end of the day, how much are you really getting out of it, right? You're not learning. Learning is
Yeah.
looking up those words, understanding why these things connect. That's the whole point, and that's what you should be doing with these. Yeah.
Geez, you want to know what's crazy is so like before using a Kindle, I used to just guess what most of the words meant. Like
Now
if
you
I
can just
didn't know,
highlight
I
them.
would look at, yeah, now you just tap on it and have the meaning. And I'm like, man, this is so helpful.
Oh, really? I had two dictionaries that I always carried
Yeah, I
around.
never did that. I would just
Oh,
assume based on context
I
what the
You're
word
such
usually,
a
meant. And
fucking nerd, dude.
but usually that
I
works.
know,
What?
He's
right?
like carrying around two
I
dictionaries
like,
everywhere he
I don't
goes.
know. I like words. I like
Well,
etymology.
you can't trust the old English dictionary. You
No,
need
you
the
gotta
new
have
English
two.
dictionary too.
But no, I think,
Everywhere I went, I had two dictionaries, a Bible, a Torah,
yeah,
Quran,
all
I
this
just
don't
in
stuff.
think you're
case, you
using
know?
Every
that word
code.
correctly. Let's look it up.
I don't know. I like no, but context you can learn a lot. But I think yeah, looking up is helpful. It's good. It's
Yeah.
good to know
Yeah.
what you're doing and what you're looking at. That's the whole
Well,
part of the process.
it's really cool to be able to look up. That's what my point of the Kindle
Yeah, yeah. It
thing
does make
was.
it
Is that
easier.
it's actually really cool to be able to look up the words and be like, oh, that's what it means.
Yeah.
Which you can do so easily now that that's the point. Like it's so easy to look stuff up now. Like there's no reason.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that's funny. And I did the same thing, rush through tutorials just to get them done. And looking back, it's like
Yeah.
such a waste of time because
It
it's
is. Yeah.
so easy to look stuff up. There's
It's
AI,
so I
there's
think there's
documentation, everything's a click away. Half the time they give you the
yeah.
goddamn link. Like
Yeah,
it's
Hmm.
I think one of the reasons why is that as a junior developer, you're really in this rush to like add as many things to your portfolio as possible. And I think that's a common misconception because really it doesn't matter how many things you've built. What really matters more is like how quality of a thing you built. Because if you built
yeah.
one really cool package or a really cool app, that shows off a lot more than
Even a
like a
cool
bunch of
feature that you
smaller
added on
apps.
to something, it's
Yeah.
still cooler than, a bunch of stuff that a bunch of small apps you built from tutorials. Like something
Yeah.
unique, new to you that works well.
Yeah, totally. I had something else that I wanted to mention that I thought of before when going through tutorial hell, and sort of that idea of like seeing the broader picture that you were talking about. So one of the things that I struggled with when I first started coding was you'd watch these coding tutorials and you're just like, where are these people getting this from? Right.
Yeah.
And at some point it almost felt like magic. I'm like, how do they know to use like this thing, right? Or whatever it is. You see this a lot in JavaScript, especially when you're using like npm, because if you have packages installed, people are pulling things from packages and you're like, where does this come from?
It
And
seems
one of
like
them,
magic, yeah, because if you don't know
yeah,
the package too, you gotta find the documentation and all
yeah.
this.
And I've seen this actually in some of our students as well. It's a common thing. And one of the things that I think helped me a lot to understand some of this is whenever you see code, whatever it is, like it really comes down to the very basic principles of there's variables, right? And then there's like functions that you can do with those variables. I mean, ultimately everything else is like style, right? Like there's very few other things. So one of the things that helped me was understanding that no matter what somebody is typing on the screen, it's coming from somewhere, right? It's either built into the language itself, like it's a JavaScript method, or
Yeah.
it's being imported from some other
It's
file,
some other
right?
method they're importing from
Yeah,
somewhere
it's
else that
some
somebody else
other
made. Yeah.
package. And I saw sort of Bryce do some of this too, and other people inside the group. I saw Bryce do it recently. That's why I'm calling him out on it. But like you have to see when you're looking at code, where is this certain thing coming from, right? So like Bryce had an issue where he was trying to import something, but the path was wrong. And that's a very common issue because you're trying to, get some piece of code and bring it into another file, but the path isn't right. And so that's something that I saw frequently when I was like, where are they getting this from? And it's a little bit more confusing when it's a built-in method because then there's not a direct import, right? It's just assumed it's like built into the language itself. And so I think that can be sometimes some of the most confusing code
But you
because you're like,
have
where are they pulling this like math.random from or something like that? And you're like, there's no math package that I'm importing, but it's built in,
But
right?
that's when you go to MDN, right? Where they have every single
Exactly.
one of those listed and you can search it. And then if it's not there, you know it's pulled in from somewhere else. It's either one they custom wrote or it's being pulled in from a package or something.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And this came up last week too when we were doing the coding project that you're leading inside our Tuesday call is like part of being a developer is having curiosity, right? We all love tech. We all love code. We nerd out on this stuff. And that's why we're here, right? That's why we're not doing something else because we love this stuff. And so when you see something that you don't understand, allow yourself to have curiosity. Like
Yeah.
we were going through setting up a next project and we were going through the fonts and you had added a custom font and there was something that I think it was like display swap and it was just some, you know, basically like option that you're setting for the font. And I was like, huh, I wonder what that means. So I looked it up and I learned something, right? And
Yeah.
I'll remember that forever because I had that curiosity of like, I wonder what that means. And then I actually did the work of looking it up instead of just being like, it probably means something. Like I could have just sat there and let it pass, like it probably has some meaning, but I'm just following his code and typing it,
But
right?
you hit on a good point, right? Which is we're actually people forget that we're active learners. We're not passive learners.
Yeah.
If you just are passive, you'll take in some information, but probably like a
Hmm.
small percentage. But anytime you run into a problem that you solve yourself where you actively take action, you like
Yeah.
never forget it. Because
Yeah.
that's something like because you have a clear connection between two things, the problem and the solution. And it
Yeah.
just stays in your brain instead of somebody just saying, this is how you do it.
Yep.
And you just trying to, remember that and memorize it.
Yeah, totally. Um,
Good
so
morning, Chris.
yeah, good morning, Chris. Good morning, everybody. Let us know if you're watching, if you've been stuck in tutorial hell and how you've gotten yourself out of it or what that's felt like to you.
Mhm.
Because I think we've all been there before. I think it's a very common thing for new developers to feel this sort of tutorial hell. Go
I
ahead,
wanted to add
Daniel.
something else too. I think about those like big ideas and understanding like how this, because if you understand how tech works, the code
Hmm.
is only going to facilitate that, right? And it can
Yeah.
only do that. So if you understand how APIs work, if you understand how the internet works, it helps you figure out a bunch of stuff. So I know a really good practice too that I used to do and still do actually is if I run into something I'm not sure about, is either find a book that covers it or like a YouTube video if you don't like reading, right? Somebody that's just not doing code, just explaining the concept really in
Yeah.
depth. Like how do APIs work? What is what is client side, server side? What's the difference? What does, because there's so many terms thrown around too in tech. And if you
Yeah.
don't really understand them, they often are referring to, different interactions and links between things. It helps you sort of start to understand the larger picture and see, okay, that's how I'm going to get there from point A to B, right? And make
Yeah.
that actually work.
Yeah, I wanted to mention a few things. So one, I totally agree with that. And I think we overlook how important foundational knowledge is, especially when we're beginning in this field, because you just want to get into the cool stuff where you are using special packages to do like base tracking or something like that. But we lose sight of the foundational things that are, the very basic sort of boring stuff. But sometimes that actually matters more because you're understanding like, I very rarely just see a tutorial on like how the internet as a whole works,
Yeah.
right? You see like these amazing tutorials of building some cool app, but they don't actually explain like what is happening when you make an API request or something like that. So I think that's very helpful to get that foundational knowledge. The other thing that I wanted to mention is if you do feel like you're stuck in tutorial hell, I think there's two big steps that you can do to break yourself out of that. Number
Give
one,
up.
no.
Just quit.
I mean, you
Quit.
could. I guess there's three then. I
That
guess
is
there's
always an
three.
option for everything.
There's two main options. You could give up or you could continue. So let's start with
Mhm.
that. So let's pretend for a second you don't give up.
Mhm.
Now, what do you want to do? I think the first thing is community. I think that was one of the most helpful
Oh
things
God, yeah.
because living in a void of just coding on your own and
In your own
watching
head.
somebody on YouTube do something, yeah, there's a lot of things that come up with that. There's like imposter syndrome where you're like, I can't do this. How are they so good at it? There's also like, we only have awareness of the things directly in front of us. I think one of the most beneficial things with community, and you'll see this with the people inside our web dev incubator, is like they appreciate the fact that other people are working on other things and we share that knowledge, right? So they learn about things that they normally wouldn't because
Yeah.
normally we're sort of like a horse with blinders on. We're just focused on what's right in front of us. And having a community of people who are doing other things, who are sharing and have the same interests, but maybe in a slightly different area of tech, allows you to get more exposure to more different topics and see how all these things actually interact with each other. The second thing I would say, so
Well, they
community
do
is
all
one.
connect. That's the other thing, right? Everything
Yeah,
connects because it's all integrated.
it
So,
does, yeah.
yeah.
And as you get better at coding, you start to see that bigger picture of how all these things like come together and connect. When you're just starting out, it's hard to see that, and I think
Yeah.
that's why people get stuck too, where they're like, I'm so confused. What the hell is going
We're
on here in
afraid
this
to take that next
project?
step to the larger thing, right? To like, okay, I'm going to try out
Yeah.
like APIs or I'm going to try out this other thing. You get stuck in like, I just want to do design because you're afraid to move on because it's comfortable.
Yes, yes, exactly. I think that's a great point. And so my second thing is, first you need community, and the second thing is you need to build stuff on your own, right? Because following tutorials, that's why it's called tutorial hell, because you feel like, okay, I did this tutorial, but I didn't learn enough to build my own thing. So I'm going to watch another tutorial. And it's just this vicious cycle of I got exposure to enough new stuff that I feel sufficiently insufficient with my knowledge, right? Where you're
And
like,
at the
I've
end of the
just
day,
learned.
nobody's going to hire you to watch tutorials.
Yes,
No,
exactly. Right. Like that's not what your job is. Your job is to build things. And
and
so,
solve problems. Like, and that's
yeah,
getting into that building on your own. You solve problems from the moment you
yeah,
start.
exactly. So I think that's super important. And I would say this too is, especially if you're starting in web development, you want to try to build a full stack web application as soon as possible. And what full stack means is you have a front end, like a user interface. It does something that interacts with a back end database or business logic, and they're connected via an API. And the reason why that's so important, like that seems sort of trivial. It's like front end, back end, cool. I would even throw in there like if you can do auth too, but that's maybe like the next step. Start with just connecting a front end to a back end. So can you add data to a database? Can you retrieve that data from a database? If you can do that, you've pretty much accomplished every single app on the internet,
Yeah,
right?
you have.
Like that's literally what every single thing is. So if you can start with that bare minimum of like build some user interface that somebody can interact with, that data gets sent to a backend via an API, and then you can retrieve that data as well. You basically have like 90% of what web development is.
Not to mention, yeah, I think full stack is the way to go now. Even if you like something
Yeah,
else, it gives you the larger picture so you understand what's going on. But that's just it too. I think if you start to build your own projects, you start to see how these things connect together because you
right,
have to figure it out, right? It's a problem
right.
you have to solve. And just giving yourself to the room to just persevere through it, make mistakes. You can always fix your problems. And that is, I think, the approach that you can take that'll get you through that tutorial hell.
Yeah, totally. Good
Good
morning,
Hey,
morning,
John
John.
John.
Schaub.
Yeah.
Hey,
And
we all
and
said at the same
also,
time.
yeah, and also being okay with it looking terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So like a lot of people don't get started because they're like, oh, I only know HTML and maybe a little bit of CSS. I can't make something that looks good. And it's like, it doesn't matter. This is your first iteration. You make something
yeah,
and then you learn some more and then you improve upon what you've made. So it's
yeah,
kind of like, I know like all of us, if we look back over what we've done over the past few years, what we're able to do now is completely different than what we could do
Oh God, yeah.
previously. And
yeah,
but we never would have gotten to where we are right now if we didn't make things that looked terrible.
Actually, it's
yeah,
funny because if you look through, like I can look through my projects, my GitHub, and you just see the progression, and you also see there's so many projects that I did like 5, 6, 7 iterations because I just kept trying it again to make it better, more efficient, look
yeah.
different, and it's a great way to just keep learning and reinforcing what you've learned over and over.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think one of the things that you don't realize too when you're first starting out is that these projects that you see where they're like designed amazingly, number one is most of the web developers are not actually designing that as well.
No.
They're using another design from a web designer, right? So you're relying on somebody that does that for a living. And two, a lot of those designs come from component libraries. So the fact that you're like, I can't design that, it's because somebody spent hours developing components
Yeah.
and like they've already done 90% of the heavy lifting, and then maybe you just style the color of that, right? So yeah, I definitely had that fear when I was starting out as well, and that held me up is like I need to make stuff look amazing. I mean, I've made I think probably 10 or 15 different portfolio websites because of that, because I'm like, this isn't good enough, it needs to be perfect. At the end of the day, somebody cares about like, you know, what are your skill sets? So if you want design to be part of that, if you want to be a front end designer, sure, work on that. But I think when you're starting out, it's really helpful to understand the bigger picture of how all these things are connected. But yeah, don't let that, you
No.
know, don't let that hinder you.
I was gonna say
Go
too,
ahead.
one of the other things I think that got me, and I'm sure a lot of other people with tutorials too, is when you're starting out, it makes it seem like you can complete a project really fast, and it gives
Yeah.
you a false sense of time when you're
Yeah.
working on your own. When you first start a project, no, it's gonna take a while. There's gonna be
Yeah.
problems, and that's okay, especially if you do the whole thing. But the other important thing too, I think, is do the whole project start to finish. Actually deploy it live.
Yeah.
Don't shortchange yourself because also understanding that final, even if you're not going to, even if you might not be on the deployment side later, that'll also help you understand that larger picture of how these things connect. You'll run into errors you didn't get in dev because in
Yes.
production mode's different. And
Yeah.
understanding that sometimes even if it works great in development, it might break in production because of various reasons, and you need to figure that out. And
Yeah.
those are also good things, I think, in learning, learning opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because one of the things that I've seen when I've deployed projects too is I'm working on, all of my computer, looking at my phone, right?
Yeah.
So when you design something, you're like, oh, it looks great on mine. But when you deploy it and you have somebody else look at it and they're like, this looks like crap on Safari, or this
Yeah.
doesn't look good on my Android phone, all of a sudden you realize that not all browsers are the same. So not all browsers have the same features. Not all of them interpret code the same either,
I didn't
right?
know iPhones and Androids are actually a different width until
Yeah.
I used my partner's phone to check something. I was
Yep.
like, oh my God, this is like narrower and it looks weird now. So I had to, yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah, it's very strange. So, and they have some of those tools built into browsers, but there's still some variance when you look at somebody's actual device, because remember that also there's a lot of people who are using very old devices, right? Like there are people who are still using iPhone 4, 5, 6, whatever. And so you want everybody to have a good experience on your app. So I think that's important. Like, definitely deploying. What did Bryce say? There's also a big difference between working on your development computer and deploying it to another service. Yeah. So
Yeah.
like, if you're building a backend and you're hosting that on your local machine, and then all of a sudden now you want to do that on AWS or something, that's a big step,
Yeah.
right? And I want to mention this too because we talked about it briefly, and I think this is a good point. Is you always hear this whenever people are doing a tutorial, we say it frequently, and we're like, okay, now we built this tutorial, now add your own thing to it, right? And I think that's for junior developers that sometimes feels like daunting or like is hard to conceptualize. Like, what does that mean? So, how would you guys suggest that people add a new feature or add something to the project that they can grow from? Because we say that all the time, but it's like, what does that actually mean?
I think it's just a real usable feature that adds some value. So I'll give you an example. Like when I was first learning Python, I built a, it was like basically I guess you would call it a clone of, that game where you shoot the
Oh yeah,
asteroids.
like
It is literally
asteroids.
called
Yeah,
asteroids, I think. Yeah. Anyway, so what I did was I added a scoreboard that the user could
cool.
see. So
Yeah,
something that's practical that gives some value but it's small also, like a contained
yeah,
feature. And that was a fun one because it integrated a lot of aspects of the project into that one feature, right? Like the start to finish, what player, keeping track, all that stuff. Something
yeah.
like that. It doesn't have to be huge. Yeah, good.
Here's another idea. So we have this crazy thing called AI, which,
Yeah,
Yeah,
also
is
has that.
super useful. So when you're done coding something out, throw your code into your favorite AI, ChatGPT, whatever it is, and just be like, hey, I'm a beginner developer. What are some added features or added functionality I could add to this app that would be easy to implement? And I'm
yeah,
sure it would spit out a handful of ideas for you, and you
Yeah,
could just
that's a
go
good
ahead
idea.
and do those things.
It's a really good
absolutely. Yeah,
idea.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, my go-to is usually styling choices, so maybe changing the style a little bit. But that's only going to help you again with like CSS. So agreed, like maybe add some other feature that you need some other logic built into it or something like that. But I think you both are right in that it should be something small and digestible. One of the things that comes to mind is I built this like development tracking app, and I actually asked for input from the community, which was very helpful, right? I asked, hey, is there any feature that you guys think I should have? And Chris, who's watching, actually mentioned this feature, which I implemented, and I thought it was great. Was basically it tracked your hours that you worked, but then he was like, "Well, can you make it track like how much money you're making?" Right? And I thought that was really cool because who doesn't want to just have an app running that shows like as money's ticking up, right? As you're making more
Yeah.
money. And so it was a cool feature because it then showed just from how many hours do I work and what's my pay per hour. It actually in real time updated, how much money I was making. So sometimes getting community feedback is super helpful too, because other people can look at something a little bit different.
I just want to add one other thing too, because I know we're going over a little bit, but
Yeah,
adding those small features, once you do one, it's like a huge win because you'll realize you could do
totally.
something on your own. And then honestly, once you start building your own projects, you will just depart from tutorials for the most part. And you'll come back to
Yeah,
them here and there, but like you'll start focusing more on building because that's what we all want to do. And I think the sooner you get
yeah,
into that, the better you're going to be as a developer and the faster you're going to learn too.
yeah. Nowadays, I think I use tutorials mostly for learning new packages that are
Quickly
large.
learning
So
stuff, yeah. Like new stuff
yeah,
that comes out, you get somebody else to go through it with you real fast. It's a great way to learn quickly, and then you can move on, right?
Yeah. The other thing is I'll use like pieces of tutorials. Like if I'm trying to implement something and it's not working for me, if I can find a project that uses it. But a
Yeah.
lot of times that's a little bit harder because it's built into a longer tutorial. So you have to kind of skip around and find it. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Once you sort of step out of that and start building your own projects, ultimately what you like the end goal here is to sort of depart from tutorials as a whole and
Yeah.
start figuring out how to code based on documentation. Because once you master that skill, the world is your oyster. Because the reality is there's not going to be a tutorial on every new technology out there. If you can learn from documentation, you're basically ahead of the curve all the
Nor a
time.
tutorial is going to cover everything. And a lot of them also have
Yes.
sponsors and stuff, so they're going to have stuff that might not be relevant to you. Like
Yeah.
you get to choose everything. And it also, I think the other thing that people forget is when you build a project, you choose the tech. It helps you start to
Yeah.
understand which is the best for the job. You know, it helps you get a sense of like, why don't I want to use a lot of dependencies? Why does that cause problems? Like all these things come up as you do it. And I think, you
Yeah.
know, you get more out of it doing it yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
All right.
Well, with that, thank you guys for tuning in to another Saturday. If you are interested in learning web development, we have two great offers for you. Number one is right now we have a 75% off sale on our web dev Kickstarter course where you can learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript,
It's
as
also a
well as
super good
build.
deal. It's a great,
It's
yeah, it's
an
a huge
excellent
course.
deal for 24.97. You can build your own Chrome extension as well as learn all those technologies. You just use the code Turkey at checkout. That's available until December 3rd. So grab that, up until next week, the beginning of next week. Also, if you do want a community of like-minded developers who are working hard to break into the industry, we have an amazing group. It's called the Web Dev Incubator, and it's sort of our little inner circle. You get private access to us 24/7. We have 2 calls every week, Tuesday and Saturday, where we build projects together and we keep each other accountable and on track with our goals, as well as doing quarterly planning and all sorts of other good stuff in there. So if you want to check that out, you can actually just write Turkey in the comments and we'll reach out to you. Or if you want a faster track to that, just ping us on DMs, and we'll set up an action call with you where we'll just go over basically what the program is, where you are as a developer, see if it's a good fit for you. And if you want an even faster track, up in the featured section in our Facebook group, there is a comment there. It says type yes if you wanted details. In there, you'll find a link to that action call, and you can schedule that yourself. Also, if you are watching on YouTube, come hang out with us on Facebook. It's an amazing community. It's totally free. You can post your story and get feedback from other people in the group, learn what they're doing, and just interact with us and see these live streams
John
live
asked,
every
what's the
Saturday.
URL again? What URL, John?
For the action call, I presume.
Yeah, you're
Um,
just going to go to the top
I'm gonna
of
drop
Code
it in the
Noob's
comment
We can
page.
for you.
drop it. We'll drop it
Yeah,
in the comments for you. We can also I'll drop the
Yeah,
one for the course too, for the courses.
yeah.
yeah.
With that,
And
go
also
ahead.
to whet your guys' appetite for anybody who really wants an intensive learning experience. Like, let's say you know HTML, you know CSS, you know JavaScript, you're ready to jump into frameworks because you know that's how you get hired by all the best companies. Well, you're in luck. We have a week-long intensive coming up in a nice holiday location, and
Hmm. You
but
mean
that's all the
a warm holiday
Yeah,
a
we'll
location,
warm
share
holiday
we'll share
location.
more
Yeah,
details
not
as we get it
Aspen.
worked out and fleshed out
yeah,
more. Yeah.
yeah. But just to wet your whistle, you can reach out to us if you want more information. But it's coming, so
Nice.
yeah.
Just like
Yeah,
winter.
Mhm.
winter's here, man.
I know. But
Hurricane
it'll be
season
coming
ended
winter.
today. I think I saw Bryce post this. I think hurricane season in Florida ended today, so we're in the clear,
Yeah.
everybody.
All
Just
Oh,
right.
wanted to
good.
put
Till
that
next
out
time.
there. All right,
Oh,
guys.
good.
Have a
All right.
great Saturday. If you are in the Web Dev Incubator, we'll see you in about 20 minutes. Just check the group for the link. Otherwise, enjoy your Saturday. Happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see
Mhm.
you next Saturday.
Later,
Peace,
fellas.
guys.
All right. See you.